Damaged drain pipes possibly to blame for Festival Walk flooding. A weather expert says last night's hail's unusual in various aspects. And Australia's leader vows to continue searching for Flight 370.
Hello and a very good evening. The Buildings Department says damaged rainwater drainage pipes are possibly to blame for last night's flooding at the Festival Walk shopping mall in Kowloon Tong. The pipes have now been repaired, but shops there are still counting their losses. Evelyn Leung reports.
The mopping up continued at Festival Walk this morning. The worst affected area is underneath this glass ceiling on the upper floors of the north side of the mall. And today it was still dripping everywhere. The part of the ceiling that gave way right next to the ice rink has been removed. 2 people working at this makeup counter managed to escape unscathed just before the ceiling came down. The shop's manager is still calculating the losses and was just glad that no one was hurt.
From our side, I think the most important thing is the safety of our beauty advisors. So as long as everybody is safe, I think we are okay.
Because the mall had been flooded with rainwater, many of the escalators here had to be shut down. And workers have been here since this morning, removing the water from the escalators. The Buildings Department said this afternoon it's believed that damaged rainwater drainage pipes on the roof of the mall caused the water to seep in. Engineer Greg Wang explains.
And because the water accumulated to a certain depth, there is certain pressure causing the large quantities of water to flow into whatever cracks and cleavages on the roof and causing this waterfall problem.
Alarming as it might have seemed, the Buildings Department said the water leaks had nothing to do with last night's hailstorm. The damaged pipes have since been fixed. It was chaos inside the mall last night during the black rainstorm warning. Electric cables were left exposed when a part of the ceiling collapsed. No one was hurt. Evelyn Leung, TVB News.
And unstable weather continued to affect the territory today. The amber rainstorm warning was in effect for 3 hours in the morning. As Vicky Kung reports, the hailstones last night were unusual in various aspects.
Hong Kong woke up to yet another downpour after the thunderstorm overnight. Rush hour traffic slowed to a crawl in some places. The amber rainstorm warning was in effect between 8:40 and 11:40 a.m. And at one point, the observatory warned of the possibility of more hails in some areas. The inclement weather this morning was due to a trough of low pressure sweeping across the region. More than 40 millimeters of rain was recorded in many parts of the territory. The weather is expected to remain unstable at least until Thursday. In Kwai Chung, a wall collapsed at the car park of an industrial building on Wah Sing Street after heavy rain. At Siu Lam Chun, the water level was about 30 centimeters high. The rain also caused heavy crop damage. This woman at Yin Kong Village in Kwu Tung shows us what last night's hailstorm did to her field of lettuce. She says the vegetables were damaged after the field was flooded 3 times in the past 24 hours. This farm estimated that the losses amounted to some $200,000. Apart from the rain, there were also gusty winds of up to 100 kilometers per hour in parts of Hong Kong this morning. At a container terminal in Tsing-yi, strong winds brought down a cargo container. It crushed 6 vehicles underneath. Although the city has been hit by hailstorms before, a weather expert we spoke to thinks what happened last night was unusual in various aspects.
Normally, in the past, whenever a hailstorm occurred in Hong Kong, it's very localized. Like, it's in Yuen Long. So it's not to the extent that, like last evening, so many places, all at once, they're reporting these hailstorms. And in terms of intensity also, in the past, maybe the hailstones are just like peas. But now, actually, last evening, from what I've heard from the news, and some of them are as big as ping pong balls, and some even like eggs.
Lee also said hailstorms are normally reported in Hong Kong in the transition period between spring and summer. He believes Hong Kong will be seeing more of these extreme weather conditions due to global warming and urged the society to decarbonize. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, North and South Korea fired artillery shells into each other's waters today. The flare-up of tensions forced residents of 5 frontline South Korean islands to evacuate into shelters. The South Korean Defense Ministry says North Korea fired more than 500 rounds of artillery, much of which landed in waters south of a disputed maritime border. The South returned fire with more than 300 rounds aimed at an area north of the so-called Northern Limit Line. The maritime border wraps itself around a part of the North's coastline and has been the scene of frequent clashes. North Korea has racked up the rhetoric in recent weeks and conducted a series of missile launches in response to what it sees as a threat posed by a series of joint US-South Korean military drills. The current drill ends on April the 18th.
In Taiwan, President Ma Ying-jeou said today he is willing to continue dialogue with those who are against the controversial Service Trade Pact with the mainland. However, he stressed once again the agreement will not be withdrawn. The president has invited the student protesters to a meeting in the presidential palace to discuss the trade pact without preconceived notions. Meanwhile, sources say a leader of the student protests, Lin Feifan, and 2 others have received threats, demanding they stop their protest action or else there could be bloodshed. However, Lin has dismissed this as rumours. Australia's Prime Minister sent reassuring words that no matter the time and money, they will not stop searching for the missing Malaysia Airlines plane. But one salvage expert insists this is one mystery that won't be solved for a very long time. Sonia Artero reports.
Australia has officially placed no time limit on the hunt for flight MH370, which vanished more than 3 weeks ago.
We owe it to the families, we owe it to everyone who travels by air, we owe it to the governments of the countries who had citizens on that aircraft, we owe it to the wider world.
With what little searchers have to go on, one of the world's most experienced deep-sea shipwreck hunters believes relatives will have no closure for a very long time. That, coupled with the fact that the black box battery will die out in less than a week.
The harsh reality is that we're not going to find that black box in this phase of it. It would be 1,000,000 to 1 chance for them with the amount of time that they have.
He's using the example of the Air France plane that crashed in the Atlantic Ocean in 2009. Even though experts knew where it crashed, it still took 2 years to find its black box. So, locating any wreckage in the treacherous and deep Indian Ocean will take even more time and money.
For example, Air France was, I think, $45 million or 45 million euros. We're looking at well beyond that, into the hundreds of millions and greater.
Frustrated they weren't getting the answers in Beijing, dozens of relatives of the missing passengers flew to Malaysia, where they also prayed at a temple near Kuala Lumpur. Their fury with the Malaysian government rages on. They say something is not right about a government that insists your loved ones are all dead at sea with no evidence. Yet, in this interview, Malaysia's acting transport minister says they're still searching for survivors.
They're saying, please search for survivors. And I said, that's always been my priority. You know, it's not about the plane. It's not about the black box. It's about the people in the plane.
This and other confusion is only fueling more anger and suspicion. The Malaysian government is hiding the truth. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have had 4 hours of talks in Paris aimed at diffusing the crisis in Ukraine. After the meeting, it was clear that both sides have very different ideas about how to calm tensions and de-escalate the conflict. Here's James Aiken.
The talks were long and frank, but as Russia continues to mass troops along its border with Ukraine, it's clear one of the few things Washington and Moscow currently agree on is the need for a diplomatic solution to the crisis.
Any real progress in Ukraine must include a pullback of the very large Russian force that is currently massing along Ukraine's borders. And tonight, I raised with the foreign minister our strong concern about these forces. We believe that these forces are creating a climate of fear and intimidation in Ukraine.
Russia continues to insist it is simply conducting military exercises and has no intention to cross the border into Ukraine. In addition to calling for the pullback, Kerry ruled out discussing a Russian demand that Ukraine become a federalized nation unless Ukrainians are at the table. But Moscow remains deeply suspicious of the new government in Ukraine. So Sergei Lavrov stuck to arguing for the idea of Ukraine as a loose federation of regions, each of which would enjoy major autonomy from Kiev. Ukraine says the Russian proposals seem more like an ultimatum aimed at breaking up Ukraine. A hastily arranged meeting between Lavrov and Kerry was also intended to present Russia's responses to a U.S. proposal that covers Ukrainian political and constitutional reforms. Kerry proposed a number of ideas on troop withdrawals, which Lavrov said he would take back to the Kremlin. Both sides did agree to work with the Ukrainian government to improve rights for Russian-speaking Ukrainians and disarm irregular forces and extremists. Since Russia moved to seize Crimea, the U.S. and EU have dealt 2 rounds of sanctions against Russia that include visa bans and asset freezes for some of Russian President Vladimir Putin's inner circle. James Aiken, TVB News.
French voters dealt a severe blow to the socialist government in Sunday's municipal elections, but the party retained the crown jewel of Paris by electing its first female mayor. Socialist leaders conceded defeat in voting seen as a referendum on unpopular President François Hollande, who was expected to reshuffle his cabinet to boost the government. Hollande is suffering record-low poll ratings for his failure to cure France's poor economy and jobless rate. The anti-immigration far right, which claims that France's large Muslim population is Islamicizing the nation, made solid advances. The anti-EU National Front of Marine Le Pen took control of 11 towns across the country, plus 1 district in Marseille. And 54-year-old Anne Hidalgo shared her plans for being the first woman mayor of Paris.
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is hailing what appears to be a decisive victory for his party in local elections. Erdogan's ruling party swept municipal elections, gaining almost 46% of the vote and retaining the key city of Istanbul. The party is also leading in the capital city, Ankara, but votes are close and will likely be contested. Erdogan was not on the ballot in the countrywide polls, but he campaigned as if he were. Analysts say the result amounts to a vote of confidence for Erdogan and will encourage him to run for presidential elections in August, where he would have to win 50% of the votes. Erdogan's presidential aspirations were put in doubt after last year's anti-government protests, a corruption scandal, and unpopular moves to block Twitter and YouTube. And still to come in our news tonight. At least 44 lawmakers to join the Shanghai trip. A new group fighting for legislation on government archive keeping. And China's top leader visits diplomats' pandas in Brussels.